Now, I want to digress here and talk a little bit about extracting resources from the population, because it's not as straightforward as it seems. It's not just simply a matter of taxing. The problem was this. The Zhou feudal system took the territory of a state and divided it between the lord of the state and the many nobles. There was no real central control, and that meant that if a state had to go to war to defend itself or to try to conquer another state, the lord would have to depend on the nobles to bring in their resources to form an army, which would soon, after the war, dissipate and go back home. What the states are beginning to see is that to fight effectively, they have to control resources from the center. And that means undermining their own nobility and trying to concentrate resources in the hands of the lord of the state. There were ways of doing that. One was to make sure that the population around the place where the lord had his capital would report directly to the lord, and their resources would go directly to the central state. The other way was when new territory was conquered and settled, to make sure that that territory would be administered on behalf of the lord of the state and not divvied up among the nobles. This had started to be a pattern among all the central states that were warring with each other. The Qin adopted it as well, and they adopted a particular kind of administrative unit that we now call the district or the county, the xian. In fact, it has lasted till today in China as the lowest level administrative unit, which is guided by centrally appointed officials. These institution of these counties or districts, the xian, meant that resources now could be gathered locally and could flow directly to the center to supply the armies. And that was the launching point for power. What made Qin special? Well, for one thing, it had a fairly large territory that was underpopulated, and that could welcome in migrants from wars elsewhere. Second, they had, it seems, a fairly weak nobility, so imposing this district or county system on its territory did not bring about as much opposition from noble families as was the case in many other states. So Qin had an advantage in mobilization. Its nobility could easily be recast as officials and as military officers. In effect, what Qin did was change the definition of the state, the guo, to use the Chinese term of the Zhou dynasty, from a feudal state to a bureaucratic state. And with that, it went out to conquer all the rest of the other states. Xiangyang talks to the Lord of Qin and points out that if you look at the three groups that you depend upon, the farmers, the soldiers, and the officials, farmers don't like to pay taxes if they can avoid it. Soldiers really don't want to fight if they can avoid it. And officials tend to be self-interested and concerned with getting greater wealth for themselves. So what can the Lord of Qin do? Xiangyang has a solution. He says, in the first place, there should be no possibility of rewards and advancement outside of the offices and the institutions you create. And this would mean, for example, that you don't really want to have opportunities for gaining private wealth. Private wealth would mean that outside of the state apparatus, without serving the state, you could become wealthy on your own. So there's a very strong anti-merchant attitude in this. There should be no honor available to people in society outside of honors bestowed by the state. In all ways, public concerns should trump private concerns. Public concerns should outweigh private concerns. Xiangyang gives an example. The basis for wealth in the state are the farmers who produce goods. Now, how do you make sure that they keep producing goods and that they pay their taxes? You distribute land to them, they pay their taxes, are in a sense really the rent they're paying on their land. But Xiangyang goes further than that. He says, well, there should be no avenues of advancement outside of the state. Farmers have to see that there's nothing really they can do except farm. They can't become merchants. They can't get rich. Cut back on make sure that the rewards you give people are so low that they can't consume much with them. Don't have a lot of consumption goods. Make life simple and frugal. Make sure that people are working, that they have no choice but to work, that they'd have no opportunities outside of the work that they'd been assigned. Forbid luxuries. If people have nothing extravagant to spend money on, they'll not be concerned with making much money. Don't let official families maintain slaves and estates. Don't allow people to move in search of more lenient treatment. Bind them to the land. Raise your tolls on bridges and ferries so that merchants don't find it attractive to travel far. Xunzi, the Confucian philosopher, travels to Qin, and he sees a country that's frugal, that has all sorts of good qualities, hardworking, frugal, simple, but also, he says, a place that's dark and gloomy with a frightened population. Now, in practice, Qin's policies were set up so that the official system had around 18 ranks, but you could only enter it through military merit. There was no right to office on the basis of birth. In other words, there was no feudal nobility, or there was hardly left a feudal nobility to try to claim ranks in government. It demanded that elites must fight. Nobles could not pass down their titles to their descendants. Everything had to be earned. To make sure that families stayed small and kept paying their taxes, they started to say that if there were more than 2 adult males in a household, the household would be taxed double, meaning in effect that families would split up and the tax burden would be equally spread, but more taxes would be coming in. They organized households into mutual responsibility groups. People would be responsible for their neighbors responsible for them, to see that they paid taxes, to see that they obeyed the law, to see that they were peaceful and hardworking. And if you did something wrong and your neighbors knew about it, even if they didn't know about it, if you did something that was illegal, your neighbors would also be liable if they did not report you to the courts. There was, in fact, impartial enforcement of the law. Everybody was equal before the law, or almost. There's a story of the son of one of the lords of Qin who breaks the law. I believe it was because he was using grain to make wine. And when he does that, that's a capital case. You're executed for breaking that law. Well, he was the heir apparent, the crown prince. Hard to execute him. They executed his tutor instead, holding his teacher responsible. This is not something that I'm particularly in favor of, to be sure.